The man who will ruin her life is already watching her. He has been watching her for 3 weeks. He knows she takes her coffee black. He knows she leaves work at 6:47 p.m. He knows she sings under her breath when she thinks no one can hear. He knows she is the most dangerous thing he has ever encountered, not because she carries a weapon, not because she knows his secrets, but because she makes him want to be something he is not capable of being. He is Luca Vitale. He runs half of New York's underworld with a handshake and a smile that has preceded the deaths of 11 men. He does not fall. He does not feel. He does not beg. She is Sienna Russo. She is a forensic accountant. She has unknowingly been dismantling his financial empire one spreadsheet at a time. This is not a love story. Not at first. At first, it is a war, and only one of them knows it is being fought. Hello, and welcome to a new story. If you enjoy dark and intense stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel because if you don't, you'll miss many more dark stories waiting for you. Now, turn off the lights and let the story begin. The most dangerous kind of love is the kind that you walk into knowing exactly what it will cost you and choosing to pay anyway. The numbers never lied. That was what Sienna Russo had always believed, what she had staked her entire career on, her entire identity, really. Numbers were honest in a way people were not. A figure on a spreadsheet could not be charmed or bribed or seduced into telling you something that was not true. It either balanced or it did not. The math was indifferent to your feelings about it, which was precisely why, at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, Sienna was still at her desk in the Manhattan offices of Castellan Financial Investigations, staring at a column of figures that were quietly, methodically, elegantly lying through their teeth. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. She was the last one in, as usual. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, the city blazed and churned. She could see the East River if she turned around, a black ribbon between the lights. She did not turn around. She was looking at the quarterly filings of Vitale Property Holdings, LLC. On paper, Vitale Property Holdings was exactly what it claimed to be, a mid-sized real estate development company with holdings across 4 boroughs, modest margins, a clean debt structure, and a modest but consistent annual return. The kind of company that showed up at charity galas, sponsored Little League teams, and made exactly the kind of donations to the police benevolent fund that ensured a friendly relationship with the detective precincts. On paper, it was boring, safe, invisible. But Sienna's job, the actual job, the one she had been doing quietly for the Fiscal Crimes Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office under a consulting contract that her agency handled so no one would notice a government flag, was not to read what was on the paper. It was to read what was beneath it. And beneath the quarterly filings of Vitale Property Holdings, LLC, something was very, very wrong. She pulled up her yellow legal pad. She still used paper, which her colleagues found unbearably old-fashioned, and began writing numbers. Inflows. Outflows. The ghost transactions she had found in the subsidiary ledgers, amounts that moved in and out of an LLC called Meridian Building Services within a window of 48 hours, always just below the federal reporting threshold, always routed through a holding company in the Cayman Islands that shared a registered agent with 14 other shell companies across 3 continents. It was beautiful in its way. Whoever had designed this structure was genuinely talented. The kind of person who understood how bureaucracy thought, who knew exactly where the gaps were in AML monitoring, who could build a financial architecture so complex and yet so internally consistent that a casual examiner, even a smart one, would walk away satisfied. Sienna was not a casual examiner. She wrote a number at the bottom of the page, circled it twice, and set down her pen. $47 million. Conservatively. Over 18 months. She did not know yet what the money was for. That was not her job. Her job was to find it, document it, and hand the file to the prosecutors, who would hand it to agents, who would make the arrests. She filed the yellow pad in her locked drawer, shut down her workstation, pulled on her coat. The name on the filing, The one name that appeared consistently across the LLC registrations, the property deeds, the signature lines of a dozen operating agreements, was Luca Vitale. She had looked him up, of course. She always looked up the principals. Luca Vitale, 42. Educated at Fordham. 1 year at Columbia Law before he left to run the family business when his father had a stroke. Born in Brooklyn. Unmarried. No criminal record. Photographed occasionally at charity events. A tall man with dark hair going silver at the temples. Always in a suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent. Always with the same faint, controlled smile that communicated that he was pleased to be photographed and would not remember your name in 20 minutes. He looked like the mayor of a small, very prosperous European city. He looked like the kind of man who cut ribbons at hospital wings and read poetry. He looked like nothing at all. Sienna buttoned her coat and took the elevator down. She did not know, stepping out onto the wind-scrubbed sidewalk of West 47th Street, that the black Escalade parked across from her building had been there every night this week. She did not know the man in the back seat was watching her. She did not know that her careful, invisible work had been noticed by the very person it was designed to destroy. She walked to the subway, her breath fogging in the cold. She was thinking about the numbers. The numbers were thinking about her, too. 3 weeks earlier, a man named Danny Chen had died in a parking garage in Red Hook. The official story, the one the NYPD had filed and quietly closed, was that Danny Chen had been the victim of a random robbery gone wrong. He was a contract accountant, 41 years old, divorced, 2 kids in New Jersey. He had worked for a property management company. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The unofficial story, the one that existed only in 3 places, an FBI field office in Lower Manhattan, a legal pad in Sienna's locked drawer, and the memory of a mid-level U.S. attorney named Rebecca Holt who had recruited Sienna 18 months ago over lunch at a diner in the West Village, was different. Danny Chen had been the inside source who had first tipped Rebecca Holt to the Vitale money laundering operation. He had worked for Meridian Building Services for 2 years. He had photocopied enough documents to fill a banker's box. He had been terrified and brave and trying to protect himself and his children, and he had died in a parking garage 14 days before he was supposed to meet with the prosecutors. Rebecca Holt had called Sienna the morning after they found Danny's body. "I need you to rebuild what he found," Rebecca had said. Her voice was flat and careful, the way it always got when she was keeping the fear out. From the outside. No inside source this time. Clean work, nothing they can trace. "I need it airtight, Sienna. I need it so clean they can't sneeze on it without it holding." "How much time do I have?"
"A year.
Maybe 18 months before they move everything offshore. After that, we lose the money and we lose the case." Sienna had looked out the window of her apartment. It was raining. "All right," she said. She had not asked about Danny Chen. She had not asked about the danger. She had not asked about the people who would be very unhappy if they discovered what she was doing. She had just gone to work. That was what Sienna Russo did. She went to work. Luca Vitale was not a violent man. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself, in those rare moments of self-examination that he allowed. He was not violent. He had not been the one holding the gun in the parking garage in Red Hook. He had not ordered it, not in so many words, not in any way that could be recorded or recalled. What he had done was say, to the man who handled such things, "The problem in Red Hook needs to be resolved," and the man who handled such things had understood what resolving meant. This was how the business worked. You said things in ways that could not be proven. You created distance. You signed your name to nothing that mattered. He told himself this, and he believed it, and he was, in the privacy of his own thoughts, a liar. He was sitting in the back room of Palazzo Vitale, the restaurant on Carroll Street in Brooklyn that had been his family's for 3 generations, when Marco came in and sat across the leather booth and slid a manila folder across the table. "She's good," Marco said. Marco Caruso was 48, built like a refrigerator someone had taught to dress well, with 26 years of loyalty and 6 years in a federal penitentiary on his record. He was the only person in Luca's world who told the truth. Better than good. Whoever is handling her knows what they're doing. Luca opened the folder. A photograph. A woman leaving an office building. Late 20s, maybe 30, it was hard to tell from the angle. Dark hair pulled back. A coat that was practical rather than fashionable. The kind of face that looked like it was thinking even at rest.
Sienna Russo, Marco said.
31. Forensic accountant. She runs her own consultancy, Russo Analytical, but her main client for the last 18 months has been a shell company called Bridgepoint Advisory Services. We dug Bridgepoint. It's a pass-through. The actual client is the U.S. Attorney's Office. Luca studied the photograph. How far has she gotten? Far enough to be a problem. Not far enough to be a crisis.
Yet.
Marco adjusted his cufflink, a gesture Luca recognized as the man preparing to deliver news he did not enjoy delivering. She found the meridian structure. Not all of it. She doesn't know about the second layer, the Cayman account through the Seychelles. But she's close. Another 2-3 months she might be. Who else knows what she's found? Rebecca Holt at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Possibly 1 or 2 FBI field agents. The circle is very small, that's how they're running it tight after what happened with Chin. They're worried about leaks. Luca closed the folder. He did not need to open it again. He had a good memory. One of the things his father had identified early, had cultivated the way you cultivated a crop, with patience and specific pressure. Luca could look at a set of figures once and recall them a month later. He could read a room and remember every face. He had looked at Sienna Russo's photograph for approximately 15 seconds, and he could now reconstruct it in complete detail. The slightly uneven part of her hair. The small scar on her chin, barely visible, the kind you get from a childhood fall. The way her eyes, dark, almost black in the evening light, were already looking somewhere beyond the frame of the photograph, already working through something. "What do you want to do?" Marco said. This was the question. This was always the question, and the answer was always the same. Resolve the problem. Cleanly, efficiently, in a way that created no additional complications. But Luca was looking at the photograph, and the photograph was of a woman who sang quietly to herself walking to the subway at midnight, and something was wrong with his calculus. "Nothing yet," he said. Marco looked at him. Marco had the particular talent of expressing great skepticism without changing his face at all. "Nothing. I want to know more about her first.
Who she is.
What she cares about. Whether she has people she's close to." He paused. "I want to understand what I'm dealing with." "You don't need to understand her too." "I know what I need," Luca said, not unkindly, but with complete finality. "Give me 3 weeks." Marco took the folder back.
He stood. 3 weeks, he said.
After he left, Luca sat alone in the back room. The sounds of the restaurant filtered through the door. The clink of glasses, laughter, his mother's voice from somewhere near the kitchen, the particular living warmth of the place where he had grown up. He had loved this room as a child. He had eaten his first birthday cake at this table. He had sat here on the night of his father's stroke and felt the weight of everything settle onto his shoulders with a finality that had never lifted. He thought about Sienna Russo and the numbers she was counting. He thought, 3 weeks. He had not examined why he wanted 3 weeks. He was examining it now. The world Luca Vitale had inherited was not the one from the movies. It was smaller and stranger, and more boring than that. There was no grand council, no 5 families sitting in a mahogany room deciding the fate of the city. That world had died with his grandfather's generation, killed by RICO prosecutions and generational attrition, and the simple fact that criminal empires, like all empires, eventually ran into the limits of what human greed could sustain. What remained was a network, a set of relationships with politicians, with union leaders, with contractors and building inspectors and judges and police captains who had been carefully cultivated over decades. A set of businesses that were mostly legitimate and some that were not. A reputation that was half myth and half genuine, the kind of reputation that meant people did not ask too many questions when Luca Vitale called. And money. An enormous, complicated amount of money that had to be cleaned and hidden and moved and invested. A river that required constant management and constant vigilance, because money, dirty money especially, had the properties of water. It always found the cracks. Luca had not chosen this.
He wanted to be precise about that, too.
He had been 17 years old when his father's stroke happened, and the business, the real business, the one that didn't show up in any quarterly filing, had been explained to him in this same back room by a man named Sal Greco, who had served his father for 30 years. You can walk away, Sal had told him. Your father wouldn't blame you. But you need to know, if you walk away completely. New name, new city. They will protect you for a year. After that, you're on your own. The money is gone. The business is gone. And the people who depend on this family, the 40, 50 families on this street and the next 3 streets over, the men who have been with us for 20 years, they're on their own too. Luca had been 17. He had been frightened and grieving and already, underneath the fear, furious at the trap that had been laid for him by birth. And, if I stay, he had said. Sal had looked at him with those old, bottomless eyes. Then you become what this requires. And you do it better than anyone has done it before you. He had stayed. He had become it. He had done it better. But there was a version of himself, the 17-year-old boy who had been sitting in this room before the trap closed, who sometimes looked at what he had become and felt something he had no useful name for. Something like grief. Something like the awareness of a door that had closed a very long time ago. He did not spend much time on that feeling. He had a business to run. The first time Sienna saw Luca Vitale in person, she did not know who he was. This was the sort of thing that seemed, in retrospect, like a failure of professional due diligence. She had looked him up. She had studied his photographs. But photographs of powerful men are curated things. Managed images designed to communicate exactly what those men want communicated. And what the photographs of Luca Vitale communicated was a kind of handsome, controlled anonymity that flattened him into the category of successful businessmen and allowed him to disappear. The man who sat down across from her at the coffee counter of the Chambers Street diner on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of February was not anonymous. He was, in a way she couldn't immediately account for, the most present person she had ever seen. It was not his looks, though he was undeniably good-looking in the way that men in their 40s can be when they have spent those years living rather than merely getting older, a leanness and a certainty that were not available to younger men. It was not his clothes, though the suit was clearly expensive in the quiet way that real money expressed itself. It was something else, an attention, a quality of stillness, as though everything around him was slightly less real than he was. He ordered coffee. Black. Sienna registered this and went back to her laptop. She was there because the diner was a 20-minute walk from her apartment, and she liked working outside the office when she was doing early-stage analysis. She didn't like people looking over her shoulder. The diner was quiet in the morning, and the counter seats faced the window, and the coffee was genuinely good. She was not supposed to work on the Vitale case in public. Rebecca had been explicit. But she was only reviewing publicly available LLC filings, which technically did not require confidentiality, and the morning light was good, and she was close to something, and she could feel it the way you felt the shape of a solution before you could name it. The man 2 stools over stirred his coffee. She ignored him and went deeper into the filing. There it was so simple she almost laughed. A depreciation schedule that didn't match the acquisition date on the corresponding property deed. A small thing. The kind of small thing that meant nothing on its own, but that, when you set it beside the 12 other small things she had been collecting for 4 months, made a pattern as clear as a signature. She wrote 3 words on her legal pad and double underlined them. The man 2 stools over glanced at her. She didn't look up. "Whatever you're writing," he said, "it looks like it matters." His voice was quiet. Not performing quietness, Actually quiet, as though it had decided some time ago that it didn't need to fill space and had been comfortable with that decision ever since. Sienna looked up. Dark eyes, dark hair, silver at the temples. A face that was both sharp and, she noted this with a professional part of her brain, slightly, carefully held. Like a man who had learned to manage what he revealed. Just work, she said, and looked back down. The serious kind from the looks of it. Is there another kind? A pause. Then, unexpectedly. In my experience, most people at a diner counter at 8 in the morning are either avoiding something or running toward it. You look like the second type. She looked at him again. He was looking at the window, not at her, holding the coffee in both hands with the easy comfort of someone who's spent a lot of time in his own skin. What type are you? She said. He seemed to consider this genuinely. I used to know. Now I'm less sure. She almost smiled. That's a very artful non-answer. It's the honest one. He glanced at her, and the glance was brief and direct in a way that made her feel briefly, uncomfortably seen. Luca, he said. Sienna. He nodded and looked back at the window. They sat in silence for another 10 minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happened between two people who were both, in their different ways, accustomed to thinking, and who did not feel the need to paper over it with noise. When she packed up her laptop and pulled on her coat, she said, "Have a good morning."
You too, he said.
Sienna. She walked out into the cold and went to work. She did not think about him for the rest of the day. She thought about him at 11 p.m., just before she fell asleep, and was irritated at herself for it. Luca told himself he had not planned it. He had known from Marco's surveillance reports that she worked at Chambers Street 3 mornings a week and that the Chambers Street diner was where she went when she needed to think. He had known this. He had looked at the report and absorbed the information the way he absorbed all information, filing it without comment. He had not planned to be there. This was what he told himself, and he was, as previously established, a liar. What he had not planned was the conversation. He did not have conversations with people he was supposed to be assessing as threats. He maintained distance. He read the reports. He made decisions. He had not planned to sit 2 stools away and say anything at all. But she had underlined something on her legal pad with such ferocity, a small, precise, furious motion, that he had found himself speaking before the calculation of whether to speak was complete. He was back in the restaurant kitchen when Marco found him. You talked to her. Luca was tasting the sauce for tonight's service. You're having her followed. Of course I am. You asked me to. Marco set down his phone on the stainless steel prep counter. You talked to her for 11 minutes. She didn't know who I was. That's not the point. What is the point? The point, Marco said, is that you went to a diner where we knew she would be, and you introduced yourself by your first name to a federal witness who is building a case against you. That is the point. Lucas set the spoon down. He turned around. Marco's face was the same as always. Careful, loyal, and currently in the business of not telling Luca what he was actually thinking. She's not a federal witness yet. It's a semantic distinction that will not comfort either of us when... I know what she looks like in reports and photographs, Luca said. I needed to know what she looks like in person. That's all it was. A silence. Marco picked up his phone. I'll arrange additional surveillance on her digital communications.
Good.
And Luca. Marco paused at the kitchen door. Don't go back to that diner. Luca turned back to the stove. He went back to the diner the following Thursday. She saw him before he sat down. She noticed his arrival the way she had trained herself to notice things, peripherally, without giving the noticing away. He came in at 8:07, same as last week, ordered coffee without looking at the menu, and took the stool 2 down from hers. Not the stool next to her. 2 down. Leaving a gap. Sienna tracked this and found it interesting and told herself to stop finding it interesting, because she was here to work and a man in an expensive suit who happened to come to the same diner on the same morning was a coincidence, and nothing more. She was building the second layer analysis. She had found 2 more ghost transactions in the Meridian subsidiary since last week, and she was trying to trace the routing number for a wire transfer that had passed through what appeared to be a defunct construction company in Queens. It was the kind of work that required complete focus, the kind that blocked out everything else. She was focused for about 3 minutes. Then, still the serious kind, she did not look up. Still. Different spreadsheet or the same one? She looked up. He was looking at the window again, not at her, with that quality of attention she had noticed the first time, as though the window was genuinely interesting to him, not an excuse to avoid her. How do you know it's a spreadsheet? You're squinting. People squint at numbers, not at text. She almost laughed.
Forensic accountant, she said.
So yes, spreadsheets. Always spreadsheets. Forensic. He seemed to sit with the word. That sounds like something has already died. Something usually has, she said. Financially speaking. Companies, careers. Occasionally people. A very brief pause. Almost imperceptible. Sounds like important work. Someone has to do it. She looked back at her screen. What do you do, Luca? Real estate. Boring, she said pleasantly. He laughed. It was a short, real, slightly surprised laugh that she suspected was not one he produced often. Yes, he said. It is mostly. Mostly? The interesting parts are mostly about people, he said. The buildings are just. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. Frameworks. What matters is who's inside them. Sienna looked at him. He was looking at the window. That's a surprisingly philosophical answer for 8 in the morning. I've been up since 5, he said. By 8, I've run out of practical things to think about, and I'm down to the philosophical air. What do you think about at 5? Problems. He said it simply, without drama. By 7, I've solved most of them. By 8, I'm left with the ones that don't have solutions. She was quiet. On her screen, the routing number sat in a column, waiting. What kind of problems don't have solutions? She said. He turned and looked at her for the first time, directly. His eyes were very dark, darker than they'd seemed in photographs, which had flattened them to something manageable. In person, they had a depth to them that made her feel, briefly and irrationally, that he was looking at her from a great distance, from somewhere she couldn't quite reach. The kind you made, he said, a long time ago, when you were too young to know better. She held his gaze for a second. Then she looked back at her screen. That's very specific, she said quietly. Most problems are. They didn't talk again after that. When she left, she said, see you next week, maybe. And he said, maybe. And they both knew it would not be maybe. What Sienna did not examine, not that night, not the following week, not for some time, was the fact that she had enjoyed those conversations more than she had enjoyed a conversation and longer than she could easily measure. She had a life that was full by any external measure. She had work she cared about. She had an apartment she loved in the East Village, small but flooded with morning light. She had friends, Julia, who taught high school English and called Sienna her most impossible friend with enormous affection, Marcus, who had been her closest friend since college and who had moved to Los Angeles, but called every Sunday, her sister Gia in Hoboken with her husband and 2 kids, and the weekend dinners that were loud and warm and occasionally overwhelming. She had, in other words, people. But she had also, some years ago, made a quiet decision about romantic relationships, the kind of decision that doesn't announce itself as a decision, that masquerades as practicality. She was busy. She was focused. She had priorities. The work was important and absorbing and required a level of concentration that made the softer, slower business of building intimacy with another person seem not exactly unwelcome, but inconvenient. At the moment. She had been saying at the moment for 3 years. This was not something she examined closely. She went to the diner the following Thursday, and he was there, and they talked for 22 minutes, and when she went home, she did not examine why she had paid particular attention to the way he laughed when she told him about the auditing error that had once led her to discover a mid-sized hedge fund where the CEO had been paying for an entire secret family in Cincinnati. An entire family, he said. Wife, 2 kids, a dog, a timeshare. For 9 years. All hidden in conference expenses. Conference expenses. Conferences in Cincinnati. He had looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "And what happened to the wife in Cincinnati?" She sued him. She won. She got the timeshare. Good, he said simply. Not, how funny. Not, what a story. Just good. As though the outcome was the only thing that mattered. She hadn't examined why she found that appealing. She was examining it now. By the end of February, Sienna had established, with what she considered sufficient confidence to begin drafting a preliminary findings memo, that Vitale Property Holdings was laundering somewhere between $40 and $60 million annually through a 3-tier shell company structure that used legitimate property development as its cover. The money came in. She didn't know from where. That was the FBI's problem. What she knew was how it moved, from whatever its source was, into Meridian Building Services as fictitious subcontractor invoices, from Meridian into 6 holding companies distributed across Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada, from those holding companies into a Cayman Islands vehicle called Bluestone Capital Management, which had no apparent operations but received quarterly consulting fees, from the holding companies, and from Bluestone, back into Vitale Property Holdings as investment capital. Clean and taxable and entirely unremarkable. It was elegant. She had to give them that. She was sitting with Rebecca Holt at a coffee shop in the financial district on a Friday afternoon, watching the preliminary memo take shape on her laptop. How confident are you? Rebecca said. Rebecca was 53, with a kind of face that had been handsome rather than pretty and had grown better with age. She had been a federal prosecutor for 25 years. She had the contained, watchful manner of someone who had learned long ago that certainty was expensive, and she could not afford to spend it casually. On the structure? 90%. On the flows themselves, where the money originates, not confident at all. That's not my work. FBI thinks it's drug distribution. Primarily fentanyl, through a distribution network they've been trying to penetrate for 3 years. Brooklyn-based. Sienna absorbed this. She had known in the abstract what the money was. Dirty money was always one of a small number of things. But knowing abstractly and hearing the specific word were different things. How much longer do you need? Rebecca said. Another 2 months. I want to trace the Bluestone account. I think there's a 2nd-tier offshore vehicle they're using as a buffer. If I can document that, the paper trail is unbreakable. 2 months, Rebecca said. She was looking at the middle distance. There's something I should tell you, Sienna. Sienna waited. The FBI has had an open surveillance file on Vitale for 8 years. In that time, they've lost 2 informants. Danny Chun was the 3rd. The word lost sat on the table between them. He is careful, Rebecca said. Extraordinarily careful. He is also intelligent and patient in a way that most people in his position are not. He doesn't take chances he doesn't need to take. He doesn't leave loose ends. She looked at Sienna. This is not meant to frighten you. This is me telling you. You are invisible, and you need to stay invisible. No direct contact with anyone associated with Vitale Holdings. Nothing that creates a pattern they could notice. Understood, Sienna said. On the train home, she thought about the diner. She thought about a man named Luca who drank black coffee and had been up since 5 solving problems, and who said good when a wronged wife got the timeshare, and who had eyes like a decision. She thought about the photograph in her case file, the charity event, the controlled smile. She thought about this for a long time. It was not possible. She had no last name. She had no connection. The probability that the man at the diner was the man in her case file was... She was very good at numbers. She did not finish that thought. She went home and opened the case file and looked at every photograph she had of Luca Vitale. The charity events, the ribbon cuttings, the one candid shot from a restaurant opening, three-quarter profile, slightly blurred. She closed the file. She opened it again. There was a man in the background of the restaurant opening photograph who was not Luca Vitale, who was turned away from the camera, so only half his face was visible, but whose profile, whose particular quality of stillness in a noisy room, made something in her chest do a thing she deeply disliked. She stared at it for a long time. Then she did what Sienna Russo always did when confronted with a number that didn't add up. She went looking for more data. The next morning was a Saturday. She wasn't supposed to go to the diner on Saturdays. She went to the diner. He was not there. She ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and felt something she recognized with some shame as disappointment. She opened her laptop. The routing number from the Queen's construction company was still waiting. She began to work. She was deep in it, the good deep, when the world contracted to the problem and everything else fell away, when the stool 2 down from her was occupied. She did not look up. "You work Saturdays," he said. "I work every day," she said. "You're not a Thursday person exclusively, apparently." "I had a meeting nearby." A pause. "I didn't expect you to be here." The statement had a particular quality that she noticed, but couldn't quite name. Something slightly off. As though the words were true, in a technical sense, but not in a complete one. She looked at him. He was looking at the window. His profile was sharp and careful, the jaw set slightly tighter than it had been before, and she thought, he is managing something. "Last name," she said. He turned. "I just realized we've been here 3 times, and I don't know your last name." She kept her voice light, her face neutral, the professional mask so well worn she could feel nothing through it. "It's a strange omission for a diner regular." His eyes did something almost invisible, a shift, a fraction of a second, so small she would have missed it if she had not been watching for exactly that thing, the kind of micro-expression that happened when someone decided in real time what the truth cost. "Vitale," he said. The room did not change. The coffee on the counter did not change. Everything in Sienna's body underwent a seismic event of approximately 7.4 magnitude and showed none of it. "Sienna Russo," she said, steady as anything. "I know," he said quietly. She looked at him. He was looking at her. The window had been abandoned. "You know," she said. "I do kropka." Silence. The diner hummed around them. Someone at the far end of the counter ordered eggs. "Then you also know," she said, very carefully, "what I do for a living." "I do kropka." "And why you're relevant to it." His jaw tightened by 1 degree. "Yes." Sienna picked up her coffee. Her hand was steady. She was enormously proud of her hand in this moment. "So, what are we doing here, Luca?" she said. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that had weight to it, that was doing work she couldn't see. "I don't know," he said at last, and she believed him completely, which was the most frightening thing about the situation. She paid for her coffee, packed her laptop, stood up. "Don't follow me," she said. Not frightened, just clear. "I'll stop having you followed," he said. "I can't promise more than that right now." She looked at him. He was looking at her with those impossible eyes and something in them that she could only describe as exhaustion, not physical, but the deeper kind, the kind that came from carrying the shape of yourself for a very long time. "That's not enough," she said. "I know," he said. She walked out. She walked 3 blocks before she had to stop and press her back against a building and breathe. Then she called Rebecca Holt. Rebecca did not yell. This was worse, in some ways. Sienna had been prepared for yelling. She had been prepared for the controlled fury of a federal prosecutor confronted with a breach of operational security. She had not been prepared for the silence that followed her account of the diner conversations, a silence that went on long enough that she checked her phone to confirm the call was still connected. "How many times?" Rebecca said finally. 3 Thursdays and 1 Saturday. "Today." "You talked to him 4 times." "I didn't know it was him until today." You knew it was him before today. It wasn't a question. Sienna closed her eyes. I suspected. Yesterday. She stopped. There was no version of the next sentence that served her. I confirmed today. And you went to confirm it in person? Yes. Another silence. Sienna, Rebecca said, very quietly, do you understand what this is? This is not an awkward professional situation. This is a man who has, she stopped herself. He builds things in threes. He is patient and deliberate, and he does not do things without purpose. The fact that he approached you, introduced himself, had 4 conversations with you, this is not a coincidence. This is not him being charmed by a pretty woman at a diner counter. I know that. Then what is it? I don't know, Sienna said. He said he didn't know either, and I believed him. That might be the most alarming part. A very long pause. You believed him. He told me he would stop the surveillance. He told me he knew my name. He didn't. She was parsing something she hadn't finished parsing. He didn't threaten me. He didn't warn me off. He didn't try to recruit me. He just sat there. With me. Sienna? I know. I know what that sounds like, and I'm not. She pressed her palm against the cold concrete of the building. I'm telling you what happened. I'm not telling you it's fine. It is very much not fine. You need to suspend your work on the case, and I need to loop in the FBI about this contact. Don't. Please. She hadn't planned to say please. If you loop in the FBI, they'll pull me off and bring in someone else, and we'll lose another 3 months of groundwork. I am 2 months from a complete paper trail, Rebecca. I need 2 months. Silence. You don't go to that diner again, Rebecca said. Agreed. You don't initiate any contact with him. You see him on the street, you turn around. You receive any communication from him, you call me immediately. Agreed. And if he contacts you, if he makes any attempt to interfere with your work or threatens you in any way, I call you. You call me and you call 911, and you do not try to manage it yourself. Rebecca. She kept her voice level. He told me he'd pull the surveillance. For him, that's a man making a calculated gesture to see how you respond to it, Rebecca said. Don't romanticize it. Sienna thought about the way he had said, I don't know. The exhaustion in it. I'm not romanticizing it, she said. She wasn't sure she was telling the truth. Luca pulled the surveillance on Saturday afternoon. Marco received this instruction with approximately the same expression he used for everything, which was to say, an expression of complete blankness that nonetheless communicated volumes. You're pulling the surveillance, Marco said. Yes. On the woman who is actively building a federal case against you. Yes. Marco sat down. This was unusual. Marco was not a man who sat down in the middle of conversations. Luca. I have been with you for 23 years. I sat with you when you were 17 and your father was in the hospital. I drove you to Columbia Law. I flew to Miami when you needed me to handle. He stopped. I have never told you that you were making a mistake. I know. I am telling you now. Luca looked at the window of his office, the upstairs study above the restaurant, where he had run the business since he was old enough to understand what running it meant. The window faced a courtyard, a magnolia tree that was one of the only trees in this part of Brooklyn that had survived the city's decades of concrete expansion, stubborn and scarred, and still producing flowers every spring. I know, he said again. Then why? Because she looked at me this morning in a way no one has looked at me in a very long time, he said. Not with wanting and not with fear. She was working something out. She was deciding something. And I could see the moment she decided it, and it was, he stopped himself. It was worth more to me than keeping the surveillance. Marco was quiet for a very long time. That's the most human thing I've heard you say in 15 years, he said at last. He didn't sound reassured by this. He sounded frightened. Pull it, Marco. And the case she's building? Give me a month. A month for what? Luca didn't answer. He was looking at the magnolia tree. There were no flowers yet. February was too early. but the buds were there, tight and patient on the branches. "A month," he said. She found the second-tier offshore vehicle on a Tuesday morning in her office, alone, with cold coffee and a legal pad that had 6 pages of notes on it, and a feeling in her chest that she recognized as the feeling of a door opening. The Cayman vehicle, Bluestone Capital Management, had a registered agent that also served as the registered agent for 43 other companies. Most of those companies were boring, small businesses, family trusts, entities too modest to be interesting. But 2 of them were not boring at all. One was a company called Helios Strategic Partners, registered in the Seychelles, which had never filed a return anywhere but which had received, over the past 3 years, approximately $22 million in wire transfers from Bluestone. The other was a company called VPH Reserve Trust, registered in Singapore, which held exactly one asset, 100% interest in Vitale Property Holdings, LLC, which meant that the money's journey was a circle. From Vitale Property Holdings, through the shell structure, through Bluestone, through Helios, which she was now betting was a holding account for the criminal proceeds before laundering, not just a way station, back into VPH Reserve Trust, which owned Vitale Property Holdings. The whole enterprise owned itself. It was a snake eating its tail, and it was one of the cleanest structures she had ever seen. She sat back in her chair and thought about the man who had built this. The same man who had sat 2 stools away from her and talked about problems that had no solutions. She thought about Rebecca's voice. He builds things in threes. He is patient and deliberate. She thought about the word deliberate. Then she thought about the photograph on her screen, the offshore structure mapped in her own hand, and she thought about Danny Chun in a parking garage in Red Hook, and the thought was useful. The thought was a cold and clarifying thing. The thought put everything back where it belonged. She picked up her pen. She kept working. 10 days passed. She did not go to the diner. She worked from her office and her apartment and the public library on 42nd Street, where she sometimes went when she needed complete silence. She did not see Luca Vitale. She thought about him more than she considered appropriate, and she was honest enough with herself to know this. On a Wednesday evening, coming home late from a dinner at Gia's, she found a small envelope on her doorstep. Her name on it, her first name only, in handwriting that was angular and precise. Inside was a card with nothing on it except 2 sentences. I wanted to send more. I couldn't find anything that wasn't either a threat or a promise.
Elle.
She stood in her doorway for a long time, holding the card. She should call Rebecca. She put the card in her coat pocket and went inside. She did not call Rebecca. She wrote back. She was aware this was a catastrophic decision. She was aware of exactly the ways in which it was catastrophic, could enumerate them clearly, would have enumerated them to anyone who had asked. No one asked. She wrote, "Threats I can handle. Promises make me nervous. What were you going to say?" She sent it to the email address Marco had put on Luca's surveillance reports, which she had of course memorized, which was either an act of professional recklessness or professional competence depending on how you looked at it. He replied within 4 minutes, "That I've thought about you every day for 3 weeks, and I've been in this business long enough to know the exact shape of a problem I should walk away from. You are it in every particular. I cannot make myself go." She read it twice. She replied, "I know what you've done. Not speculation. Evidence. For minutes, I know." She, "Then you know I can't."
Him I know.
"I'm not asking you to." She, "Then what are you asking?" The reply took 12 minutes this time, long enough that she began to think he wasn't going to answer. Then an hour. "Somewhere public. I want to look at you while I still can." She put her phone face down on the table. She picked it up. She typed, "Central Park. Sunday at noon. The Bethesda Fountain." She sent it before she could reconsider. She then sat at her kitchen table for a long time, looking at the wall, and said out loud to no one, "What are you doing?" The wall had no answer. She went to bed and did not sleep well and was already at the fountain 20 minutes early on Sunday. It was cold but clear, The kind of February day New York produced occasionally as a reminder that it was capable of beauty when it chose to be. The fountain was surrounded by a thin crust of snow, and the bare trees had a clean, architectural quality, and the angel of the waters stood above the basin in her stone serenity, as though none of the human drama below her was particularly interesting. Sienna had her hands in her pockets and was looking at the angel when she heard footsteps on the path behind her. She turned. He was wearing a dark coat and no gloves, and he looked exactly like himself, she was beginning to understand the problem. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. They stood about 4 feet apart. Families moved past them. A child on skates. A runner. The city going about its Sunday. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early." A beat. "You're early, too." "Also always." He looked at the fountain. "I used to bring my nephew here when he was small. He thought the angel was a superhero." "She is, arguably." "That's what I told him." He glanced at her. Not the long, held look from the diner, something briefer, more careful. As though he had decided to ration it. "You look different outside." "So do you." She considered. More human. He almost smiled. "That's a low bar." Everything starts with a low bar. They walked, without discussing, walking south along the path. The snow crunched under her boots. He matched her pace exactly, which she noticed, the particular attention of someone who had learned early how to occupy space in relation to other people. "Tell me something," she said. "Something that isn't about what I know. Something true." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My mother still cooks dinner on Sundays for 30 people. She has done this every Sunday for 41 years. She invites neighbors, people from the street, anyone who doesn't have somewhere to go. The restaurant is closed Sundays, so she uses the kitchen herself. She makes enough food to feed a small army, and she would be deeply insulted if anyone offered to help her." "That's a good detail about someone else," Sienna said. "Tell me one about you." A longer pause. "I have read every book in my father's library twice," he said. He had 642 books. He was a reader. When he had the stroke, he couldn't read any more for 2 years, and I read to him every night. Not from his books. He couldn't stand being read the things he already knew. I read him things he'd never gotten to. I worked through half of what he'd always meant to read." Sienna looked at him. He was looking ahead, at the path. "Did he?" "He died 7 years ago, before he ran out of unread things. I was glad of that." She was quiet. "That's a true thing," he said. "Yes," she said. They walked. The trees gave way to a stretch of open grass, pale and frost-stiff. "Tell me one," he said. "I became a forensic accountant because my father was defrauded. A business partner. He trusted him completely. They'd been friends since high school. The man took everything my parents had built and moved it to a company he owned in his wife's name, and there was nothing, legally, that anyone could do about it." A pause. "How old were you?" 16. "My father spent 2 years trying to find a way to prove it. He couldn't. Not because it wasn't there, but because he didn't have the tools to see it." She kept her voice even. "I got the tools." He stopped walking. She walked 2 more steps before she stopped and turned. He was looking at her with that look, the distance, the depth, but it was different now. Something in it was, she didn't have a word. Something about watching and being watched that was not the same as being assessed. "That's why you're so good at it," he said. "Probably." "Good." He said it the same way he'd said good about the wife in Cincinnati. Simple. Settled. "You know what I'm building," she said. "A case that ends your life as you know it." "I know." "And you're what? Making peace with it?" He started walking again. She fell into step beside him. "I'm not sure that's available to me," he said. "I'm not sure I deserve peace with it." "Then what?" "I'm standing next to someone I want to know and can't keep," he said. "And I'm doing it anyway. That's all I have right now." She thought about Rebecca saying, "Don't romanticize it." She thought about Danny Chun. She thought about her father sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread in front of him, trying to find something he didn't have the language for. She said, "An hour. That's what we said." "Yes." "We have 40 minutes left." "Yes." "Then keep walking." He kept walking. The angel watched them go. The 40 minutes became 90. She was aware of this happening and did not stop it. They walked south through the park and came out at 59th Street, and the light was going golden and she was cold, and he said, without particular pressure, "Coffee?" And she said yes without deciding to, and they found a place off 7th Avenue and sat across from each other at a small table and talked. She told him about her sister Gia and the Sunday dinners and her niece who was 6 and had recently decided she was going to be an astronaut specifically so she could put a hot tub on the moon. He told her about his nephew Dante, his dead sister Lucia's son, whom he had raised since Lucia died when Dante was 11. Dante was 22 now and at NYU studying urban planning, which Luca found both fitting and mildly ironic given the business. "Does he know?" she said. A pause. "He knows enough to know I'm not in the business of building legitimate properties exclusively. He doesn't know details. I've tried to keep it from him."
Why?
"Because he's good," Lucas said simply. He built himself clean. I didn't want to put my hands on that." She looked at him. "You have something like a conscience," she said. "Remnants," he said. "The original got damaged when I was 17. What you see is the repair work." That's a very poetic way to describe.
Don't be kind about it, he said.
Not harshly, but clearly. "I know what I am. I don't want." He looked at his coffee. "I don't want you to be kind about it. I want you to see it straight." "All right," she said. "What are you?" He looked at her. Outside, the light had gone, and the street was lit by neon and headlights, the relentless city burning. "A man who has done things he can't undo," he said. "Who built a life on top of those things and built it well, and does not deserve credit for the building because of what it's built on. Who is sitting in a coffee shop with a woman who is honest in a way that is..." He stopped. "Unsettling." "Unsettling," she said. "I haven't been around honesty in a long time. I'd forgotten what it felt like." "What does it feel like?" "Like standing next to a window," he said, "that you haven't opened in years." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I should go." "I know." She stood, pulled on her coat. He stood too, reflexive, the kind of courtesy that was old and unconsidered.
"Sienna," he said.
Just her name. No question attached to it. She looked at him. "I'm going to do something that will," he stopped. "Something I should have done a long time ago. It will change things." "What things?" "For me. Not for you." He met her eyes. "I want you to know that. Whatever happens next, it has nothing to do with this. With you." "I wouldn't." He stopped again, and something in the stop had a kind of rawness that she found, despite herself, the most honest thing she had seen in months. "You're not threatening me," she said.
"No, I'm promising."
Which is worse, apparently. She almost smiled. "What are you doing?" "Trying to give you something to remember me without hating me for." She stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "I'll keep working. You know that." "I know." "There isn't," she looked for the words. "There isn't a version of this that ends well for you, Luca. The evidence is going to be complete." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because I don't want the last thing I do that matters to be something I'm not willing to look at straight," he said. She pulled her coat closed. She looked at him one more time. "The thing you're going to do," she said. "Is it enough to matter?" He held her gaze. "I don't know yet. I hope so." "Do it anyway," she said. She walked out. She walked until she found a cab, and in the back of the cab, alone, she let herself feel what she had been not feeling all afternoon, which was a full, complicated, entirely unjustifiable grief. Not for herself, for the version of things that could not be. 3 days later, Rebecca Holt called. "I need you to come in," she said. Her voice had a particular quality, not the controlled containment Sienna was used to, but something slightly shocked beneath the control, the way a perfectly maintained facade revealed its structure in an earthquake.
Sienna went in.
Rebecca's office was on the 18th floor of a federal building in Lower Manhattan, a corner office with a view of the harbor that she was too busy to look at. She was standing at the window when Sienna arrived, which was unusual. Rebecca Holt sat at desks. She did not stand at windows. Luca Vitale called the U.S. Attorney's office this morning, Rebecca said without turning around. Sienna stood very still. He asked for a meeting. Not through a lawyer, personally. He wants to discuss what he called a voluntary restructuring of the situation. Rebecca turned around. He offered to provide financial records of every operation going back 8 years. Every transaction. Every shell company. Every offshore vehicle. Every person in his network. In exchange for, she paused. In exchange for a cooperation agreement that would allow him to plead down to a single count, and in exchange for the full protection of his nephew, who he maintains has no involvement in the business. Sienna sat down. He offered to give you everything, she said. He offered to give us everything, Rebecca said, including names and financial records for 11 other organizations that used his laundering structure. 11 other active criminal enterprises, Sienna. The FBI has been trying to penetrate some of those networks for a decade. She looked at Sienna with a particular look she had, the one that meant she knew something and was deciding whether to ask it. What did you say to him? I told him to keep working. A pause. You told him to keep working. I told him to do it anyway. She looked at her hands. I didn't know this was what he meant. Do you believe he'll give us everything he said he will? Sienna thought about him looking at his coffee and saying, I don't want you to be kind about it. Thought about the remnants of a conscience. Thought about the particular quality of a man who had spent 25 years being careful and was choosing, right at this moment, to stop.
Yes, she said.
I believe him completely. Then we have a problem, Rebecca said. The agreement. The agreement is not the problem. We can construct an agreement. The problem is that if you were in contact with him, and clearly you were, his defense team will. I know, Sienna said. It puts everything you've built at risk. If there's any appearance of an inappropriate relationship, any question about the independence of the investigation. I know. She looked at Rebecca. I know. She thought. I'll document every contact. Dates, times, what was said. I'll testify to it if I have to, whatever it takes to keep the case intact. It may not be enough. Then what do you need from me? Rebecca looked at her for a long moment. I need you to tell me, she said carefully, whether your judgment is compromised. Sienna thought about the park. The 90 minutes that were supposed to be 60. The window you hadn't opened in years. My work is not compromised, she said. My feelings are irrelevant. That's not. The case is solid. The evidence is solid. Whatever I feel about him has nothing to do with what I found. The math doesn't change because I met the man behind it. Rebecca looked at her window. All right, she said at last. Document everything. Every contact. A pause. And Sienna. I'm sorry, Kropka. For what? That it landed here. That he was, she stopped. It would have been easier if he'd been different. Sienna stood. He is who he is, she said. I'm who I am. We're just doing our jobs. She believed this as far as it went. She believed it completely. She went home and sat at her kitchen table and understood, with the absolute clarity that sometimes came at the end of long problems, that she had fallen in love with Luca Vitale at some point between the diner and the park, and that it was the worst possible timing in a situation full of impossible timing, and that there was nothing at all to be done about it. She opened her laptop. She kept working. In the weeks that followed, two things happened simultaneously in parallel with a synchronicity that Sienna found grimly appropriate. The case she had been building for 18 months reached its completion. The paper trail was, as she had promised Rebecca, unbreakable, a complete, documented record of every transaction in the Vitale laundering structure, corroborated by the additional records that Luca himself had begun providing through the attorneys who were, with extraordinary care, constructing the cooperation agreement. It was the most complete financial crime documentation she had ever produced. She was proud of it in the way she was always proud of clean work, quietly, professionally, with the specific satisfaction of a thing done exactly right. The other thing that happened was that she thought about Luca Vitale every day. Not sentimentally. Not in the way of longing, or not only in that way. She thought about the choice he had made and what it had cost him. She thought about the difference between a man who did something because he was caught and a man who did something because he had looked at himself clearly and found the distance between what he was and what he was willing to go on being. She thought about what Rebecca had said. He builds things in threes. She thought about what he had built this time and what it had taken to build it. Through the attorneys, she knew the broad strokes of the cooperation agreement. A single count of federal money laundering, guilty plea, 18 to 24 months. The restaurant would be transferred to his mother. The legitimate property holdings would be liquidated under court supervision. His nephew would be formally cleared, his assets protected. 11 other criminal organizations would be dismantled using the information he provided. The FBI's Organized Crime Division called it the most significant single source of actionable intelligence in 15 years. Luca Vitale would be out of prison in 18 months, if he was lucky, with nothing left of the world he had built. She thought about a man who read to his dying father, about a nephew who was studying urban planning, about 30 people at a table on Sunday nights, and a magnolia tree in a Brooklyn courtyard. She thought about what it cost to look at something you had built and choose to let it go. She finished the case in the first week of March. She filed it with Rebecca's office. The grand jury would convene in April. He sent one more letter. Not by email this time, by hand, delivered through his attorney with a note that said, formally, that the letter contained no material relevant to the case and that counsel had reviewed it. She read it at her kitchen table, holding a cup of tea. It said,
Sienna.
I told you I wanted to give you something to remember me without hating me for. I don't know if this is enough. I suspect it isn't. But here is what I want you to know. The first Thursday in that diner, when I sat 2 stools away from you, I had already decided what I was supposed to do about you. About the problem you represented. And then you underlined something with that ferocity of yours, and I thought, not this one. I don't know what that means in any moral accounting. I don't know if one good decision redeems everything it's surrounded by. Probably not. Probably nothing does. But you asked me for a true thing, and that is the truest one I have. You changed the math on me. I thought you should know it.
Elle.
She read it twice. She put it in the same drawer as the legal pads, the case notes, the documentation of a year and a half of her life. She looked out the window at the morning light on her street. She thought, you changed the math on me too. She did not say it anywhere that anyone could hear. But she thought it, and it was true, and she kept it. He entered a guilty plea on the 15th of April. Sienna was not in the courtroom. She was not required to be in the courtroom, and she had no professional reason to be there, and she was not there. She was at her office, at her desk, working on a new case, a medical device company in New Jersey, a much smaller and more ordinary fraud, when her phone showed a news alert. Organized crime. Brooklyn real estate developer Luca Vitale pleads guilty to federal money laundering charge in landmark cooperation agreement. She set the phone face down. She worked. She was good at working. At 6 in the evening, Julia texted her. Are you okay? Saw the news. Is that? Sienna replied. Working late. Call you tomorrow. She took the subway home. The city was doing what it always did, which was to be enormous and indifferent, and somehow alive in a way that made individual suffering and individual love feel simultaneously enormous and perfectly small. She sat on the train with strangers and looked at her hands. In her apartment, she made dinner, actually made it, not ordered it, something her mother had cooked and that she rarely bothered with alone, and ate it at the table by the window. She thought, he is going to be okay. He made a choice that had integrity in it. He will go to a federal facility, probably Allenwood, where the conditions were manageable. He would have the cooperation credit and a good lawyer. He would be out in less than 2 years. He would be 44. He would have a mother, a nephew, a magnolia tree. He would not have the same life. He would have something else. She thought about what that something else might look like. She thought about that for longer than she intended. Then she cleared her plates, opened her laptop, and finished the medical device fraud in New Jersey. The numbers, as always, told her exactly what she needed to know. The letter arrived in October. Federal letterhead. A facility address in Pennsylvania. Her name in that same angular handwriting. She opened it standing at the mailbox. It said, "I'm reading again. There's a decent library here, better than I expected. I'm working through what my father never got to. I told the librarian, he left a list, and she seemed to find that meaningful. I thought you'd appreciate the detail. I don't expect you to write back. I just wanted you to know the window is still open."
Elle.
She stood at the mailbox for a long time. A woman with a stroller walked past. The October light was the good gold kind. She went inside and sat at her desk and found a piece of paper and a pen, and she wrote,
Luca.
"I'm glad the library is good. Tell me what you're reading. I have some additions to your father's list."
S.
She folded it. She addressed the envelope. She mailed it before she could reconsider. Outside, the city went on being the city. Inside, Sienna Russo sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and went to work.
But she was smiling.
Very quietly, as though a door had opened that had been closed for a very long time. Part 1 ends here. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell us in the comments which scene was your favorite, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next part.